What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Game Dev Unchained, the #1 game development podcast about game development and the lifestyle thereof. I am your host, Brandon Pham, and as you can see, well, usually this is the case, I am going to be the only one here. This is a very special episode because of the status quo of today, the last week. I think it's important to kind of dedicate this episode about the coronavirus. So last week we kind of had a roundtable news episode with a panel of experts, and we spent the first half of that episode primarily on coronavirus, and you can see how a week has passed and how crazier the news has been. I mean, this is something that has been developing for a few weeks now, but I feel like the last week, especially in the United States, things have been taken more seriously. And so let's go ahead and spend this episode to talk about the long-term effects, the short-term effects, about what this actually means, and look at it with a realistic view, right? Right now, I don't know where you guys are right now, whoever is following us. We are opening up hotlines later in our Blue Champs Discord channel in the caller hotline. We'd love for you guys to drop by in there and actually be a part of the show and share what's going on within your country, within your city, what you're doing right now to self-quarantine. I think this is kind of like a way for the Game Dev Unchained community to be together, hover around that warm computer, game together, listen to each other, and really analyze what's going to be happening for the future of the industry, because the industry will be, if not already, have changed quite a bit. So let's talk about a few of those changes. Let's go in depth, right? Let's talk about the coronavirus. Is it hype or real, right? That's the biggest question that everybody's having right now. There's a big majority of United States Americans that are having like a pandemic scare, right? You might be hearing a lot about how toilet paper suddenly became a hot commodity. Everybody's going to the grocery store and emptying shelves with hand sanitizers. There's like hilarious and sad news of people trying to capitalize on that and stocking up to upsell it on Amazon for $70 a bottle for hand sanitizer and kind of being berated by the public for it. Don't know why this one particular person, you can probably look it up, ousted himself on the news on the news channels, kind of saying how it's a bad mistake, and he's trying to donate most of those stocks back because obviously, you know, the shortages are sort of real, but I mean, after a week, you know, the shelf's going to be reshelved. So people who are not really looking into this as much or are really late into actually looking into the details of this, I admit I was kind of the same. My wife, mother-in-law, everybody was around me was kind of warning me about this like a few weeks ago, but like the majority of Americans, I think, kind of felt like, oh, this is hysteria, pandemic, people are freaking out. And in a nutshell, it is sort of true because the virus itself is not that scary. I mean, of course, it's causing a lot more deaths than the flu's seasons and what we regular faced with. I mean, older people, younger people, anybody with respiratory weaker lungs are a huge danger to this, are hugely in danger of this virus. So that's real, but it's fightable. I mean, there's a good percentage of people who've gotten it and are recovered from it or are actually recovering with it. So like any pandemic, I think the scariest part is how people react, right? This is actually, I tease around with my friends and stuff, but this is a period where you actually see who people really are, right? Because that's the test. I mean, how many opportunities do you have in your lifetime can you really see a person's true character, right? Until they face real pandemics or travesty or anything that really stresses their character. So it's a good time to look around your neighborhood to see how your neighbors are reacting, how helpful they really are, because like any post-apocalyptic pandemic movies that you've seen, people usually are really cordial has at least initially have like a very nice neighborly outreach to people around them. But give it a few weeks where food supplies are getting short, government's not really backing up. That's where we'll really see it. I don't anticipate it getting that bad, but I think it's time to really wake up and really treat this seriously, because it is super contagious. It's a super contagious virus. You don't need to hear that from me, but I'm just reiterating the facts. And if you're in the United States, don't be fooled by the statistics. Right now, we're actually tracking in line with Italy. And as you know, Italy is the second country behind China, where it all started, that has the most reported cases and deaths, right, regarding to this virus, because they were mostly unprepared, didn't treat it seriously, and the country healthcare system wasn't ready to kind of handle this kind of pandemic. So we're tracking pretty much in line with them in terms of cases reported every day, and people being infected and dying from it, right? So we're actually looking at Italy. If it's the second worst country being affected, in the United States is way bigger than that. Most likely, this is something that we're looking at not just the next 4 to 8 weeks, which is where most bars, restaurants, and most self-quarantine announcements are being told to a lot of Americans right now to kind of stay home for the next 2 weeks at least, but looking at maybe 8 weeks. I anticipate, and from what President Trump has been saying, it's going to probably take over all of our summer. You got to remember, man, people haven't exactly gotten tested yet, right? And so that's where the numbers that you're seeing can be very deceiving, because per capita, United States is the worst in terms of having tests available per million population, right? So what does that mean? That means we are not equipped to have all these test kits ready, but even have a system to kind of dole them out to whoever have symptoms or anticipate they have symptoms, can go out freely and get that test. Right now, it's actually pretty hard. My household, I'm in Orange County. I don't know, man. I feel like we probably did have the coronavirus, because there was some, we thought it was a flu that kind of came through our house like a couple weeks ago. Everybody kind of fought through it, and now it's like my father-in-law is finally recovering from it. But it was a little different, so I have no idea, right? Unless we get tested. Even my 2-year-old was suffering through a 5-day cough that was pretty nasty, man. I kept him up all night. It was really rough. But what everyone is saying around the world is you can show no symptoms at all and still be positive coronavirus. But the conditions now are set in place because they don't have enough test kits available for everyone to go to the hospital and actually get tested. They're restricting a lot of people, setting up these arbitrary guidelines, pretty much saying that, you got to be in contact with someone. You got to know that, for sure. I understand from their stand, because the healthcare system can't handle a barrage of people just going to the hospitals right now, asking for tests. It'd be chaotic. But even with that being said, where people are actually being pushed away from, or being discouraged of being tested, or be turned away even though they show some symptoms or whatever, they're being, everyone's being pushed away because there's just not enough availability of them. Our numbers are tracking behind Italy. So the confirmed tests that we have been giving out to citizens and celebrities, it seems like Tom Hanks and everybody else is fine. NBA superstars can get tested, but regular citizens will have a tough time, and it'll probably be another 48 weeks before we actually see the availability of all this. So it'll be interesting having to see the results of this. What it would mean for the rest of the year. So, with that being said, we're looking at a long summer, right? We're looking at a long summer. The United States is probably much worse than the numbers that are being shown on these statistic sites. So don't look at just the deaths affected right now. Look at how many tests that actually are being confirmed versus us as a country. We have 300 million people living here. And the same day, just to give you some perspective, the same day that we started recording the confirmed cases was the same day that South Korea started confirmed cases. And we're going at a rate of like under 100 tests per day versus 3,000 tests per day done by South Korea, right? So, and they're a population of like 60 million people versus our 360. So other countries are responding a lot faster than we are in the United States. And it's one of the reasons why that Italy is in its pretty much martial law lockdown right now, where everybody's kind of contained inside their home just to kind of help curve this rising pandemic. And so we're tracking about 10 days behind them. So there is a common sense to this whole thing, a sensibility that people are going out stocking up to kind of keep from going out as much as possible. We in the United States, sorry for focusing on the United States, would love for you guys from other countries to kind of chime into our hotline later and talk about what's going on in your own country. But at least last Friday was when President Trump was basically admitting that this is a big problem, right? And then, of course, the weekend of, Costco lines around Orange County was like bending around the blocks 5 times, right? So the last weekend was the worst weekend to actually go out and try to buy something. But every week you should be stocked up. I mean, we're not in short supply. I don't think you need 6 months of supply to hide in a bunker for the next 6 months. It's not that crazy. Everyone is pretty much inside their homes right now, myself included. I mean, I've always been a hermit, so it's not too much of a change for me. So that's the situation so far, right? If you guys are not taking this seriously, if you're not believing the hype, or it's as bad as people think, or it's just as, maybe there is some truth that if people didn't label this as the coronavirus, people would have just treated it as if it's an extreme case of the flu or cold, right? That's what people would have thought. That's what I thought. I'm pretty sure I have it. I have no idea. I recovered from it just fine. But this is something that's going to hang around in the summer, right? A lot of schools, a lot of workplaces, now we're getting the game industry, are basically pushing their work to people at home, right? People are encouraged to kind of work from home, remote working, all of a sudden, right? So this is something that can be detrimental in the short sense, where games need to still be shipped. However, they're not going to be shipping on time. Let's face it, right? So for people who have never worked at home, or have always had dreams and hopes of working from home, are waking up to a reality here. Okay? And I was in this situation before. So not everybody has like a really good PC, high-end PC, to kind of be able to make that jump from workstation to home workstation, right? Not everyone is equipped to that. And it's not like the company has readily supplied workstations to send people home with, or high-end powered laptops for them to temporarily use, right? Or be on a loan. Everyone's kind of reacting to this in real time. And so with that being said, on top of that, it's not as easy as people think, right? This is from my own personal experience and just talking to a lot of people. Remote working and working from home requires a very certain discipline. And this is where I feel AAA industry professionals have the hardest time doing it. Unless you're a AAA professional that has been freelancing as a side gig beyond the AAA full-time job, you're not ready for this type of shift in mentality, right? There's so many distractions working from home, especially now you're kind of granted this freedom to kind of be your own boss per se, right? And then having the occasional Skype call here and there for meetings and such. It requires a certain focus, discipline, productivity to actually get the same amount of work done if you're at home versus if you were surrounded by your coworkers. That peer pressure does do a certain amount of pushing when you're at work. When you're at home, when no one's really holding you that much accountable as your workplace, as you guys are probably guessing, right? The bosses at these jobs are trying to figure this out. Most AAA companies before the coronavirus, before this pandemic, were largely against remote working, right? Only a few all-star member or someone that could not live by the job where the office is can get granted ability, right? I mean, this was happening 3-4 years ago. That I'm not saying remote working didn't exist, but it was very for a selected few. With the mass majority, if someone else say, hey, I noticed Joe who lives in Michigan is remote working for us, can I do that once in a week? It'll be a hard flat no, right? Unless you're a hot shot and they want to appease you. But most of the cases, right, a good percentage, let's say 70-80%, even higher maybe, would be opposed to the idea of you being able to remotely work from home when you live close to the office or whatever, right? In addition to that, something that my company does, Godemics, we offer co-development and stuff. And remote working or remote offices is relatively a new idea, right? And it's a new idea that not everybody wants to jump on board on just yet. So after this pandemic, now that everybody's working from home and there is some type of efficiency, they're still seeing some results of getting work done. Maybe not at the same pace as they used to, because for the reasons I've listed before. This, in my estimation, gonna last until probably August. I don't think anybody's gonna be jumping in the office in April, at least until mid-April. But it's even like a soft date, because it really depends on when, until we actually see in the United States that test kits are readily available for anybody who wants to go to their local Walgreens or CVS and do a drive-through test swab, right? That's kind of like what they're figuring out this week. Until that's readily available, which is probably another 2 weeks, it will take a while, probably 3 to 4 weeks after that, where offices are opening their doors again for people to come back into the office, right? So we're talking about at least 2 months. And even then, once people get tested, it takes 2 to 3 days to get the results, right? For a normal citizen. We're going to see this huge jump of actual confirmed cases in the United States, right? And once we actually see the numbers being 5 times or 10 times actually worse than the data that we have now, not a lot of workplaces will be readily available to work as normal, right? They just want to make sure that that number dies down as much as possible. So people who are sitting at their homes right now or have not been really looking at this and thinking that by 2 weeks this thing is over, especially small businesses or small indie developers. Well, indie developers actually are at least more coronavirus proof, because most indie studios actually have been doing remote work forever, right? And one of the interesting things that next week we're going to be bringing on, we're going to have Renee Gittins from the International Game Developer Association to kind of come on. We'll talk about the impacts it's been having. As you can see, left and right, all conventions, GDC, E3, South by Southwest, major conferences have been closing left and right? GDC right now, actually this week right now, are doing like a online only conference talk session for the next 3-4 days. So be sure to check that out. So there's a lot of changes being set in place already about this idea of remote working. All right. So people web conferencing, you're seeing a huge boom now. Initially people love the idea because what's not to love? You can work from home, you can try to get work done, and people are getting a taste of personal freedom, right? Something that I've been championing for the last 4 or 5 years, having that taste of what it's like to have your time back and still get stuff done. The challenge is, I would say, will take another 6 months to a year for people to adjust, for you to actually get the same amount work done as in the office and still be on time to kind of deliver on deadlines. There's an adjustment period for people who haven't done anything on the side, but only have clocked in from 8 to 5 to their jobs, right? That's the reality of that. And hopefully people who are listening to this, who are remote working and have never freelanced before and just suddenly finding themselves at home on their home workstation, and still expect to kind of deliver the same goods, it's going to be tough, man. There are challenges because communication is not as easy. Stuff that we've talked about before. You constantly have to chat. At first it's fun, but the second it can be frustrating. Things kind of being said on text doesn't have the same, facial recognition as if you were sitting next to a person. And so I don't anticipate too many fights, but there's little things that can irk people and misunderstandings can happen. And, just play it around in your head. Like you used to have deadlines 2 weeks from now. It is silly to think that your producer is expecting the same deadlines being met now that nobody is next to each other, right? Everyone's from home. It'd be tough. I mean, I think the leads and senior people will do their best to kind of make it work, but I think there is some type of leeway right now for assignments not being met. So besides from that, the good things is that after this, I'm curious to see, but I'm willing to bet that most people, after this whole thing blows over, again, late summer, when people are back in their office, I think there's going to be a good discussion about making this more of a thing, because by that time people should be adjusted, right? I don't anticipate people being laid off. That'll be very interesting. There'll be from this period from March to August. It'll be the freest period, I think, of people being laid off in the game industry. I don't think we're going to see any expose, right? I always associate office politics with being in the office, right? So if we don't have any of the office stuff, the dynamic of that would be very interesting to hear, to see how that changes. Would love to kind of talk to people, maybe after this thing's all over, to see how that has been different. Like, do people actually work better together by not being together? Or that, because now it's just all about the work, right? And I'm actually thinking through this too. As a lead, as a manager, most of your job is managing people. Although you can still do that, of course, more than ever, you need to do that doing remote work, just making sure everybody's on the same page. Communication is clear, right? Because online it's very tough to make sure everyone's is delivering. But there are some manager roles. It's just more about meetings all the time, right? So I wonder how that affects these people at these bigger companies. If they're going to be exposed for not doing much or not doing a good job, because a lot of, at least my bad experience in the AAA game industry has been managers not being accountable when things go bad, right? Because usually what happens, right, when a studio is not delivering the goods, there's a bad project or whatever, it's always the grunts that get laid off, right? Not the managers. So I wonder this flip side of things, where more than ever managers are needed to kind of step up and do things and organize. That I can see it two ways, right? That would be unbearable, right? Too much to handle, or they do too little and most of the team has to kind of pick up the slack, right? That's another aspect that would be very interesting for this period to watch. Yeah, I mean, the good thing is that games still need to be shipped. Be interesting to see if the games that companies that were crunching in this time period, usually they crunch during the summer, if they're looking for a game to be released for the Christmas holiday, especially with the Xbox and PS5 stuff. Those launch titles are under the gun even more. But it's kind of going against with the efficiency, right? Efficiency is definitely going to have a drop until it gets better. Probably a month or two for all this remote working to actually improve. People have to adjust. The thing that people need to understand, that listeners out there, and maybe veterans are listening, and not to downplay veterans, but if you're listening to podcasts, you're probably ahead of the curve, right? Let's just give you the credit, because you're already thinking about freelancer, or already doing freelancing, or have been doing things on the side, and not fully dependable on your main job. You already have this discipline. You already worked out the kinks. You already know how to stay up late or continue to work on things and be that self-motivator to kind of accomplish deadlines aside from your other tasks, right? That's the wall and barricade that I keep talking about throughout this episode, that people for the first time working from home will struggle with. You're not going to have an IT guy at your doorstep when you can't sync to Perforce, right? Things like that we take for granted while we're in the studio. You're going to have to be very technical to be able to handle that, right? Let's paint a scenario that's really real, right? Most people who haven't worked at the studio probably don't understand this, but let me walk you through this. When you start a new job and everything, the first week is usually onboarding, right? You're giving a bunch of guidelines, studio culture stuff, but most importantly, you're getting your computer set up, you're getting synced up to the depot of the project files, and you're getting set up with all the software, right? You're essentially doing that week again, if you have never worked remotely for your job, right? Because this was pretty sudden. Friday was announced. Over the weekend, studios across the nation, across the world, decided that it's best for people not to work. And so people most likely, or have been getting emails, to stay home until 2 weeks at the minimum. But a lot of places are saying mid-April, right? Stay home, work from home, right? If you're not set up yet, you're going to have to do all that setup yourself. And most people are going to struggle. They're not going to know how to work Perforce, install it, get the software they need. They have to talk to the IT from the company to get the software on loan, right? Unless they have the software at home. Most people don't. These are $1,000 softwares, right? Not everybody buys it. So they would have to, and they can't use their own personal software. That's actually advised against. If you're a full-time employee, you can't use your own software, right? So some companies might overlook that and be kind of just sweep it under the rug. But bigger companies most likely will try to do it legally, just to make sure that they don't find themselves in trouble, because we're not looking at a 2-week status here. We're looking at a month or more across the summer, right? Get people set up. So it's kind of an investment to kind of get people set up. So all this like roadblock and stuff that's going to get figured out, there's going to be a lot of investment in time and money, right? So eventually everybody, especially these companies with 300 plus people suddenly at home, they're going to get all set up eventually to try to meet these deadlines. They're not going to meet these deadlines. Things have to be revised, just like anything all the other industries are doing. Movie industry is getting hit the most right now. Everything's being pushed back, understandably, to kind of worry about this function that's not functioning anymore, right? It's a new way of thinking. And it's going to be a learning period. And like I said, efficiency will fail. So the great thing about that is that after this whole thing blows over, after all this investment in time and money to get people set up at home is finally established, they're not going to suddenly throw all that away. The conversation is going to open up. Like, hey, maybe we can do this half the week or once a week. More and more people will have the okay from upper management. It's not so preposterous anymore. It's like, hey, we've been doing this for 5 months. I kind of like that. Can I do this every Friday? More and more people are, more and more upper management is going to be open to the idea because they've been doing it. It's been tested. They see that it works. They were forced into thinking like that. And so the great thing about this whole thing is that in a short amount of weeks, a pretty old way of thinking type of industry has completely changed their minds, right? I think they're seeing the benefits where people can basically not have to come in the office. I think the result of this will have more of a hybrid approach at the very least, that people don't necessarily have to be in the office as much if they live locally, but also bigger companies will be open to the idea of not having to relocate new people to their office, right? They'll be open to the idea of just sending a workstation to a new employee and just continue to get kick-ass work because they have the infrastructure that is at least being built right now, or have been built just for a selected few, kind of open to everybody. And now they have that in place, they'll be okay with others doing so on a full-time basis, right? So that's very exciting. I mean, that will open up the industry and I feel like fix a lot of the issues that I've been having with the industry, others have been having with the industry, and most importantly, kind of move away from that mindset of crunching inside the office, right? At the very least, I think the biggest impact right there is that if you need to work those extra hours, you can go home. You know, you can go home and do it in your own comforts and be able to still deliver if you want to, right? The crazy thing about this, you know, and you're finding this too, right? Now that you're forced to self-quarantine as you're listening to this, I bet you everybody's pretty much in the same spot. Everybody's kind of encouraged to basically indulge in all the things we're told not to do, like social networking. Everyone's going to be on Facebook. Everyone's going to be watching Netflix. Everybody's going to try out this shitty service called Stadia for some reason. And most importantly, try out these games that they kind of been in queue in their wish list on Steam, or these other games that have been very time consuming. People are going to bust that out and enjoy at least this 3 weeks paid time off that most companies are giving their employees, not just in the industry. I know a lot of people in my network that have 3 weeks paid time off as the companies are regrouping, the companies that can't afford it, right? And that's a good thing. I think there's going to be a huge boost for the game industry. We've been proven in 2008 to be recession proof. And, it's very clear that we're going into another recession with the stock drops and people kind of fear mongering. And honestly, people being self-quarantined right now, no one's going out there to spend unless you're buying it through Amazon, DoorDash, food services, delivery, and all that stuff. People are really discouraged to go out right now. And for people who are bored, they usually turn to entertainment and spend money on us and streaming and stuff like that. So you're going to see a major boost in that regard. As an example, I saw an article on Death Stranding just the other day on Kotaku. I mean, that was a perfect opportunity for Death Stranding to get second life. I am curious to see if there's going to be an uptick in sale in Death Stranding, just because of how relevant the subject is on what's happening right now, right? The whole game is about an Amazon delivery guy who is delivering goods to people who are social distancing themselves, who won't leave their home because of the virus or some type of pandemic. And how prophetic Kojima is once again, right? With conditions. So I'm gonna see. I would love to see how that game is getting some love. Where it did okay sale, but not as great as Sony has hoped. I hope that game gets picked up more by gamers now, more than ever, because I am pretty sure, besides pandemic-like games like Death Stranding that are getting played more now, movies are being consumed in the same way. Just watching how these movies been warning us about this danger. And us living it, people are kind of sick that way. So they kind of want to live it and kind of be constantly reminded, oh shit, that's happening right now. So thankfully, we're not all stuck in a grocery store and kind of fighting amongst ourselves for a short supply. That's not happening. I mean, there are a lot of people kind of freaking out. And that's the most dangerous part, people and how they react to danger, right? More so than the danger itself, like in this case. So be careful out there with all that. But the industry as a whole, I think there's a lot of games that are going to be played that has been, like I said, on the wish list. Gamers are going to appreciate all these that they have overlooked, which is good. Workers are going to be appreciated even more. Funny enough, as a byproduct for not being in the office, right? I mean, that's a funny way to look at it, but if you want to take away the person with the power, self-worth, you take away the people working under that person within the office, right? It's kind of like a physical presence thing, right? Just imagine the dictator inside an office suddenly looking around the room and there's no one there, but everyone's through Skype, right? There's a sense of power that is taken away. And so a lot of humility happens, right? And so I see in result of this, workers are kind of appreciated more now that the numbers are kind of deafening. Games that are already out are going to have an uptick in sales, I think, at least in playtime, right? People are going to play. I saw the last month Assassin's Creed Unity, which has been out for like 6 months or something, right? Sold a shitload of copies because people now are just really looking at ways to kind of eat up their time. games that are in development right now are going to suffer for sure, because it isn't just like a light switch, like I mentioned, that people can suddenly be efficient at home, right? There's a learning period of self-worth, self-discipline. And after that trial, a very small percentage actually comes out on top and be able to show that, hey, remote workers can actually be more efficient, right? But most won't be able to make it. I don't see those people being laid off. I think there's a mutual understanding in this period that bosses are figuring things out too, because in the same way workers are figuring out how to be efficient, bosses are figuring out how to be a better manager through remote working, because it's a whole different beast. Not being able to walk by someone's desk and seeing the progress, right? There's a lot of trust involved, and there's a lot of reliance on technology to do all the things that we used to do physically, right? So there's a relationship there that needs to also be figured out for all companies, and it's going to be a tough one, man. It's being home for the last year, managing people, and running a company that's been mostly managing people online. I have like 4 or 5 years of experience on top of doing it with a full-time job at one period of my life, to figure it out. And I haven't figured it out yet, right? And this is me doing it full time. And so with even more people to manage, even more people to trust, even more time and crazier deadlines to meet. And then we're looking at least the next 2 to 3 months of being at home. I see a lot of delays. And it's good to remind ourselves that, yeah, August is what the timeline is, but people are going to still have it. There's going to be some type of quarantine after August, right? The numbers will go down. We'll most likely hit our peak, and it's dwindling. But there's going to still be some cautionary measures in place to make sure that it doesn't rise back up again, right? And hopefully you guys stay safe out there. And here at Blue Champs, I'm going to continuously be talking to people about how this is going to affect, because it's going to change our industry for sure, for all the reasons that I listed. So it'll be interesting to see how it changes. A lot of my guesses, I would love to confirm. So starting next week, I believe, seeing the impact of all these conferences being delayed, the indie developers, the same way that we're starting to see these small businesses, the restaurants, the bars, the gyms, or whatever, right? The economy have taken a hit. Don't know what the results of that yet. We can only guess how bad it's going to be for people that rely paycheck to paycheck, month to month to pay their rent, right? You actually expose how poor our healthcare system. People have been clamoring about this for years now. Now it's actually true. I mean, we're supposedly a first world nation, but the way that we've been responding to a pandemic such as this, imagine if the coronavirus was like AIDS, right? As soon as you get it, you're dead. And this is how we respond to pandemics, how much worse it would have been. That's a scary thought, to kind of see how your government isn't set up, or it has been so much ignored. It has been so diluted where it isn't set up to be able to handle this type of situation. That's a scary thought, right? And, the rest of the year is going to be, we're going to be seeing talking about at least Americans, the ramifications of this. Trump before was the clear winner, man. In my opinion, there was a really good chance of being re-elected, but at this pace, it's anybody's game. It could be back to the Democrats again. I'm not into politics. I don't like even talking about politics, but in terms of just the game industry and how we're seeing this, the trajectory, of course, is kind of thrown off for the rest of the year. I don't, I'll be very surprised. Well, maybe not, right? Like maybe for the same reason I said, people are going to be at home. People are going to be up for more gaming. The PS5, the Xbox, supposedly right now it's actually being announced. Would love to do a games recap, bring that back, keep you guys entertained as you're sitting at home, keep you guys engaged with those news. But it sounds like they're still going as planned. They're kind of betting on people buying these systems by the end of the year. Don't know, man. Don't know. It's for people who are depending on their paycheck to paycheck. This, they will have 3-week paid time off, but I don't know how long companies are expected to do that. That is not sustainable. Companies will eventually, we're going to hear, I think 3 weeks from now, it's going to start laying people off. Game industry is a different story, right? I don't know how they have these deadlines, they have these games they need to ship. It wouldn't make any sense for them to start laying people off just because of this virus. It's not their fault, right? It doesn't help them in any way to lay people off. So I don't think the game industry in particular will lay people off. They might have to try to leverage a lot of their remote workers that they're using right now. As much as possible. Contract workers are still going to continue, but that's a small percentage. Outsourced development teams, this is affecting worldwide, right? So these outsourced development teams still need to go in the office, right? Are they set up for remote working? So, in all aspects, it's not going to be as effective. The question goes is, unless you're a very big company that can take this type of hit, you're talking about like Disney, Activision, EA, all these guys that make billions each year and have a ton in reserve, they might be able to weather the storm until the summer and slowly roll people back into the office and get these deadlines going. Because I don't think, this is the first week, right? So they haven't, usually sprints and deadlines are every 2 weeks to a month. They haven't missed the deadline yet, so they're not freaking out yet. Would love to talk to those people. I think I will reach out to friends in the next couple of weeks. Games that are supposed to deliver by the end of the year that are crunching right now. Would love to kind of get more insight about, are you guys hitting those deadlines with people not being in the office? Most likely not, right? If they are, amazing. But most aren't able to do that. So I don't think people are going to be laid off in our industry, but other companies, other industries, you're going to start hearing people losing their jobs because, these companies aren't set up in a way where they can take these type of losses where there's no patrons going to the restaurants, going to the small business buying. They weren't ready for this. They weren't prepared for this. So small businesses are probably going to close, and it's going to start with people losing their job. And it gets scary. Right now it's scary, right? Don't get me wrong. Practice caution, get some supplies to last you a month so you don't have to go out as much. But the scary part is going out in a month, right? When you start hearing people losing their jobs and they can't pay their rent, right? Or they can't buy their food, right? That you're going to see a lot of people doing fuck it. And you're going to see some looting. Yeah, that's where you can get scary. And banks, right? Especially in a month and two or now. I'm just guessing, right? Based on history, banks are going to ban people from taking their money out. Because if everybody, they're not set up for everybody to take out their money at the same time. So eventually, if this keeps getting worse where people aren't getting paid or are getting laid off, people are going to try to pull their money, cash out of the bank. The banks are going to be forced to ban people from pulling money out of their bank, and people are going to go even more of a fuck it mode. So that's how bad pandemics can go, right? And we're at the beginning stages of it. And as soon as the test kits are available for everybody to kind of go through a drive-through, and we see that huge numbers jump, right? I mean, we're already seeing a surge, and this is with 90% of people being turned away from doing testing, symptoms or no symptoms, right? That's the scary thing about this virus. You can still have the virus and be a carrier with no symptoms. So there's a lot of people that has it, man. You're most likely having it right now. And so right now it's cool. Right now, if anything, you'll have long lines to get supplies, sure, because it's the first weekend where we have a national lockdown. Or wait for that to die down. Go out there, get your supplies. But a month from now, gamers are used to being indoors. I see us handling this just fine for our sanity. We're probably going to get more gamers, to be honest, welcoming them into the industry, be consumers, right? I think more people are going to be up for it. But a month from now, when I think starts to get really bad, when people are starting freaking out, where companies are facing the reality that this is not just going to be a 2-week to 4-week thing, that people can't keep getting paid sick leave or whatever, they're going to have to stop paying people. That is when it gets scary. And that's a real thing, man. That's something to think about. So be ahead of the curve. I say people who are thinking this is all hype or thinking this is not a big deal are behind the curve. And the virus itself is not that crazy, right? I mean, it is bad, but it's not AIDS bad, right? It's just a really severe symptom of flu and cold, right? If your body weren't able to handle that before, you're in real danger for sure. But it's the hysteria around it. The economy, right, has long-term effects. People who are not going out in all those shops, can they survive the storm, right? Most can't. And, workers are not going to have a job. And when you don't have a job, you don't have money. You can't pay the bills. The bills are still coming. So this is why everyone's kind of like, what the fuck, United States? Right? And understandably so. This is a exposure, all these warnings before we ignored because we've been kind of been doing what we've been doing just fine. But now that, danger is kind of outside of our own hands, right? You don't have any say when your workplace just lays you off. This is the stuff what Game Dev Unchained is all about. All right? This is what I've been warning about for the last 4 or 5 years. As soon as your full-time job says stop coming in, what do you do for income? All right? And not just that, we see that the discipline and being able to freelance and find your own money on the side are going to be very helpful for people who are transitioning suddenly into remote working, right? You're already prepped for this. So those people are going to strive. I think, again, this is my thoughts about what your neighbors who are not in the industry are going to be facing, which is scary, right? We're surrounded by these maniacs. Inside the game industry, I feel like we're largely unaffected because a lot of the stuff we can do digitally, online, just fine and deliver the goods. It's just, there's a learning period. It's going to take some time. So the industry will take a hit in terms of, again, meeting deadlines. But I think we're going to recover faster than other industries. We don't have people needing to go to movie theaters, right? So the movie industry, all those people are pretty much screwed for the time being, for the rest of the year, right? A lot of movies are being pushed back a whole year because nobody's expecting anybody to go back into the theaters by September or anything, right? But the game industry, I feel, is recession proof. It's just there's a whole different type of thinking. I think we're transitioning. Everybody's more open to it. Management are forced to be open to it, but they'll get around to seeing how it can be beneficial. And so like the hard hitters are going to shine. The people who have been doing this for a while, secretly on the side, hustling, can really show their strength in being able to kind of do 5 hours of work in 3 hours, right? And have most of their time to yourself. So for those people I champion for, thank you. And love that stuff, right? Keep doing that. The rest of the people are going to struggle a bit. A good percentage, I feel, won't be able to adapt. Other percentage will take some time to figure things out, be their own IT guy. I feel that that's the toughest hurdle. Just being able to be savvy enough to handle this type of situation. But in conclusion, as I've been mumbling on, I didn't think I can do a full hour, but I did a full hour. Don't be behind the curve, right? It's not hype. It's real. The numbers don't be concentrated on the death numbers, especially in the United States, and saying that it's only in the hundreds or in thousands. It's actually a lot more severe than that, because test kits aren't even out there. Being a carrier is one thing, and not showing any symptoms is another, right? So the test kits aren't really available. Even if you want to go out, even if you have some symptoms, it's hard to kind of get tested. It won't be another few weeks till they have those done. And so once we have those done, you'll see the extreme numbers. We're actually probably, I anticipate 5 to 10 times larger than confirmed cases that we have now. Most people have it. And once those numbers are in, the quarantine is going to be extended even further, right? So be ahead of the curve. And it's not about like the supplies being run short. It's like, do you want to go out in a month when people are crazier? That's the real danger. For me, that's where it's scary, right? Like I'm not scared of the fact that suddenly there's no food in the grocery store, right? I mean, some days there will be, but every week, right, it's going to be supplied. It's more about going out in a month and then seeing people super desperate because they don't have a job or they can't pay for the food, right? You don't want to be in that situation. That's where it's scary. So as my camera is freezing, let me go ahead and reset this real quick. Whoa. As I'm saying this, it's been a full hour. I think practicing caution is the best source and measure. I think you should have at least 2 weeks to a month of food supply so you don't have to go out as much. Because the news, like if you are waiting for the news to tell you what to do, it's going to be too late. That's the craziest weekend, right? If 2 weeks from now, they're like, oh my God, the confirmed cases are a lot crazier. If Trump has to go out and tell you, and you are finally reacting to that and going to get the food supply, you don't want to go skip that weekend, right? Have enough food for that week to pass by to go on a Thursday or something to get the food. Because if you go out that weekend, you're going to be stomped, you're going to be pushed. And I think 3 weeks too. A lot of these places have 3 weeks paid sick leave. What they're going to do after those 3 weeks, pay close attention to that, because it could be either most likely bad news or worse news, right? There's no good news after 3 weeks. There's no way companies can sustain this. So being a company businessman myself, if I can't pay you, I can't pay you, right? So I'm not saying this is bad on the company. It's just the reality. No one's coming in to buy the product. How can I keep paying you, right? And some companies have surplus of money where they can keep doing the right thing, but most don't, right? And then they're going to have to cut their losses, and people are going to be out on their own. It's going to be scary, right? And that's going to happen. Hopefully you guys are secure enough that live in a safe area where you don't have to face that reality, right? In the meantime, I'll definitely keep you guys updated on whatever things I find out about. I'm going to be talking to more of my industry friends to see how they're doing with their deadlines, because I am very curious about that, because that is the beginning of what could be a really cool thing, or just a beginning of a really rough period until they figure things out. So with that being said, I want to thank you guys for joining me live and listening to this episode. I just want to give you an up-to-date look of how this can affect the industry. And next week, I believe, let me check real quick, Renee Gittins, I keep mentioning it. Let me just make sure. She's the executive director of IGDA, and they're doing a lot of efforts on reacting to a lot of these conferences being canceled. And I think I mentioned this before, at least in the roundtable last week with Ray and Richard, that offsets a lot of plans, not just for the big games that I'm talking about, but the small games even more, the same way that small businesses can't handle this kind of like pause. Would love to kind of have her on to kind of talk more about its long-term effect, because these games are looking to sell at the this year, but are not having any places to kind of market. They rely on these conventions to kind of make some noise. Right now it's kind of like impossible. So we're going to look at the long-term and short-term effects of that, and looking forward to next week talking to her. Thank you guys for joining me on Twitch, as always, .tv/blue_champs. If you're watching this, you're probably watching this on youtube.com/bluechamps. And if you're listening to this, the OGs, the podcast listeners, you can always find Game Dev Unchained on Spotify or iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you guys, and I am out of here.